Hello, this is Defending Israel with David Harris. As many JBS viewers I'm sure know, American campuses have become a front line for Jewish students and pro-Israel students. Recently, I was invited to speak at Columbia University Law School to a large group of Jewish students and other supporters of Israel. And I learned firsthand while I was there some of the difficulties facing those students as they seek to defend the state of Israel and its good name. And so I thought it was very important for JBS viewers to have the opportunity to meet with two of those students and hear from them yourselves. So let me introduce those two students to you right now, Yorai and Eli. And rather than introduce them for you, I'd like them to introduce themselves to you, the viewers. Yorai, welcome.
Thank you. My first name is Yorai, Yorai Vardi. It's my full name. I come from a secular background. I was born in Israel and moved to the United States at a very young age, and then sort of lived on the line. So summers were in Israel, breaks were in Israel. And so for me, the question has always been sort of more of an Israel-centric question than a Judaism question. But then in the past years, and certainly in the past 2 weeks, it's become obvious how central sort of latent anti-Jewish sentiments are in the discussion surrounding Israel. So I've gotten more and more involved in that element of the discussion, and I'm very glad to be here.
Thank you. Eli?
Thank you, David, and thank you to JBS for giving us this platform. I'm Eli Shmidman from Queens, born and raised Queens, New York, so New York is my home and always has been. In contrast to Yorai, I come from a more yeshiva background, and in truth, I was never really exposed to what actually is going on campus until I experienced it myself right now as a law student. And it's shocking how the anti-Semitic rhetoric and the sentiments that go on a daily basis, sometimes overtly and sometimes not as overtly, it's beyond. And we appreciate being able to have this opportunity to share that with everyone else.
So I want to plunge into exactly what's going on, but first I want to ask you, prior to coming to Columbia University Law School, which is one of the great law schools in the country, obviously, had either of you experienced any form of anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism or anti-Israelism that either directly affected you or certainly caught your eye, or were you completely unprepared for what awaited you these last several weeks? Yorai?
Yeah, so it sounds like Eli and I had very different experiences.
Yes.
I've been in public high school, and then I went to NYU for my undergraduate degree. And then after that, Columbia Law School, and at every point along that trajectory, less so in high school, but at every point in that trajectory, there have been sort of virulently anti-Israel sentiments directed both at me and near me. I've lost friends, people who I thought I was very close with over this issue, over a complete refusal to talk. Despite my insistence to sort of get into the facts and the history. And I've heard
so these
comments.
friends will not even be willing to talk to you about issues that might divide you in the Middle East?
In the most extreme cases, yes.
Really?
Just
shut it down.
Shut it down. I remember in sort of the last round of fighting in 2021.
Right, May 2021.
Right, I was in Israel. And I saw a lot of people that I know and knew and felt close to sort of going on Instagram, and like we're seeing today, posting Free Palestine, from the river to the sea, sort of the phrases we're all used to seeing. And there were a few of them that I reached out, and we had productive and interesting conversations. Not that I think they changed many hearts and minds, but worth having. And there were a few that I reached out and I tried to open the dialogue, and the response. I remember specifically there was one person who said, "I'm not interested in hearing from you, colonizer, Jew boy, go cry to someone who cares," and then a lot of sort of personal attacks, and blocked him on everything. So this sort of thing that's happening now is not surprising. Obviously, it's incredibly difficult, but it has been in the air for a long time, and I'd like to hope that this is not sort of the general discussion among people who support Palestine or in some way have an anti-Israel stance, and I've sort of just experienced the extremes. But
Similar or different experiences, Eli?
Very different. Like I said, I grew up in the yeshiva world, so I was not as exposed to to people's opinions in the same way. In fact, the opposite. My sister-in-law was telling me that when I go to Columbia, you'll see how truly anti-Semitic everyone is. And I was always skeptical.
Was she right?
Without a question.
Without a question.
Without a question. And it's really
otherwise
disheartening.
great university in the center of New York City, and it's as bad as that, you're saying?
It's very bad. I think I do want to clarify that. I think the biggest part that is very bad about it is not just the anti-Semitic rhetoric and the beliefs that go on campus. It's also that the people in the middle that will be willing to have the conversation, have the dialogue, they're just too afraid because of the people that speak so loudly and yell so loudly. And so everyone's anti-Semitic on Columbia Law School campus because the people who aren't are too afraid to talk out and defend Israel, defend the Jews, stand up for what they know is right.
So are you saying that they join the other side, or they simply go AWOL?
Most go AWOL. There are few, and I've gotten
because
personal,
to say that they're all anti-Semitic is a pretty sweeping indictment.
Yeah, I think and I think the truth is that not every single one of them is. I think the fact of the matter is, and what's sad about it, is that the ones that are in the leading positions of the student organizations, the ones that have the loudest voices, the ones that are most active on the class chats and GroupMes, and the others, they're just too afraid. They come privately. I've gotten many private messages, texts. People have come over to me in person in school and shared their sentiment, their empathy with me, with the Jewish community. But it's much more difficult for them to do that in public because the anti-Semitic sentiments and rhetoric control.
Okay, so let's dial back now to October the 7th, or that weekend, October 7th, October the 8th. And Yorai, maybe think back, where were you? What did you first hear? How did it start emerging on the law school campus? And what's happened since?
Sure, so I think I had sort of, for Israelis, not extremely unique, but for American Jews, a very unique sort of October the 7th. Right. I was in Turkey on holiday with my family, aunt and uncle from Israel, and my immediate family who lives here in New York. And we all had flights scheduled on Saturday. Half of my immediate family was going to go back to Israel with my aunt and uncle and cousins. And my sister and I were going to come back to New York. And we woke up that morning, and my uncle sort of shook me awake, and he's like, "You don't understand what's happening in Israel. There's shooting in the streets. It's balagan." And I said, what are you talking about? And then sort of slowly throughout that day, I left early in the morning, but I remember that moment of all of us standing together and sort of the import of what was happening in real time sinking in, and then sinking in more, and then sinking in more. And I remember sitting in Istanbul airport and frantically refreshing the New York Times, Haaretz, Al Jazeera, Twitter, Instagram, just trying to get a handle on what was happening, and every 30 minutes it got worse. And that sort of progressive horror didn't end for days. I think up to the weekend of the 14th, it was still coming out and sinking in, and as I'm sure I don't need to tell you, it's still sinking in for everyone.
So where did that news flow intersect for the first time with Columbia University Law School?
Monday morning. First day back
that would be
school.
October 9th.
October 9th.
Right. What happened?
I get to campus, and I'd already received a lot of text messages expressing support from people that I know and love, and I sort of expected to get to campus, and this would be the moment where it becomes obvious that the situation in Israel is untenable, and the security situation is one that is extraordinarily difficult to live with, and that the resistance has been funneled into terrorism. And I finished my first class, and I'm standing outside of class, and I get an email, co-signed, one of these statements that student groups put out, co-signed by, at that point it was 14, by the end of the day it was, I think, 21 or 22 student groups.
At the law school?
At the law school. Some of which have a connection to the sort of region. You have Columbia Law Students for Palestine group, Middle Eastern Law Students group, and then a few that I to this day kind of struggle to understand what their hook was. The campus liberal organization.
And what were they saying? What was the thrust?
So the thrust was really nicely summarized in the first paragraph, sort of the introduction that some of the groups added on to the open letter. It was, we stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people. We legitimize their right to resist. We don't take on ourselves to dictate to the Palestinian people which form their resistance should take. And the point was really sort of refined later on in the paper, in the letter, where they say we wholly place the blame on the deaths and the violence to come on Israel.
So that's exactly what happened at Harvard as well with the student declaration. So no mention of Hamas by name?
None.
No mention of the word terror?
Nope.
And no reference whatsoever to any sympathy, even for children or elderly who were attacked?
Well, there was a brief sort of opening remark about the death of any person being...
Any person, but not an Israeli person?
No. No.
So let's hold that for a moment. Eli, you're a Shabbat observer. Mm-hmm. This happened on Shabbat, on Simchat Torah as well. So when did you first hear about this, and then when did the news flow intersect with your Columbia University experience?
So I first heard about it at home, being at home for the meal, and the news is starting to trickle in. Again, I'm Shomer Shabbat, and most of my community is Shomer Shabbat, so we weren't on our phones, and we didn't have a lot of the details. And then Simchat Torah morning, I was in shul, and a person that I was sitting next to, he got up. I actually know his son. Personally, went to camp many years ago, and he's in the IDF. He's I don't know exact his position. He's one of the tunnel fighters, and he got up and he said, and this is when it really hit home for me. He said, you know, we're all here in America, and we think this is so far away, but it's not. It's much closer to us than we all think. My son got called up. He's going in to fight tunnels. He's one of the leaders in his group. Right. And that's when it really hit me. Like this is not just, you know, another story that's being put out in the news that Israel and Gaza are having, and Hamas are having a battle. This is serious. And then we actually also had someone staying at my parents' house where I was for the holiday. A friend of my brother's who was from Israel, and he served many years ago, and he was tense the whole Chag. And then I believe he actually got called back up to serve. And
okay, so now Monday morning, class starts again. You have all the news that's trickling in. Where does the news intersect with your law school?
Right away. I would think like Yorai, the second you walked, I think most Jews walked in the door, you felt the tension. And
so no sympathy?
I believe I got a couple texts. It might have been Tuesday when I started getting some texts from close friends.
Sympathetic texts.
Sympathetic texts, non-Jewish friends who I have, and there's a lot of them. Like I said before, there are more than people think, but initially there was none of that. We, as a member of the board of JILSA, the Jewish Law Student Association, we worked tirelessly Sunday night to prepare a message that we wanted for the school regarding the terror attack. And we put out that message early Monday morning. I believe it was before even 9 o'clock. And so even those students who want to pretend they didn't know what was going on or they didn't really care, they all knew, because that message went to 1,400 plus students, which then gets spread amongst those who didn't even receive it. So everyone knew what happened, and still nothing came in. And then we had this joint statement from the Palestine Solidarity Group, which essentially justified all of the acts that Hamas perpetrated on October 7th.
So one of the big questions since October 7th has been, how have university administrations responded? So let's begin with the law school. What role did the dean play after October 7th, and how would you characterize that role?
To be blunt, I think the dean failed.
She failed, you're saying?
I believe she failed.
Why?
I forget if she sent her first email out Monday afternoon. I think it was Monday afternoon, but late afternoon, about 3 o'clock. So you already had all of the messaging going on from the Jewish students, from the Palestine Solidarity Group. And that's when she decided to send out her message, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It was 4 sentences that says, we are shocked by the tragic events that have occurred in Israel this past Saturday. And then another 2 sentences mentioning people to get support through Columbia's counseling services. That was her message as dean of the law school.
So she said she was shocked, but did she condemn it?
There was no outright condemnation.
Was there any mention of Hamas?
No,
Was there any use of the word terror or terrorism?
I do not believe so. Not in her first message.
And then what happened? Was there a second message? You're suggesting that might have been later messages.
There was a second message. I believe she got the backlash from the students, from the university, from people. And the president of Columbia University had sent out her own message, I believe Tuesday morning. And then Tuesday afternoon, the dean of the law school sent her second message.
How was the president's message?
The president's message, I think, was again, when you compare it to the dean's message, it was great. But for all intents and purposes, it still fell short.
Fell short because there's also been a video that's gone viral of a professor at the business school, Shai Davidai, on the campus saying, in effect, the president has been missing in action. The university is not supporting us. It's not defending us. Did you have the same experience? Or a different experience?
Well, so I was there when Professor Davidai was speaking. And I think his emotions are exactly right. And I think the university has failed to set a moral tone for the discussion. On the other hand, I understand why university administrators think that sort of these milquetoast, neutral language messaging are acceptable. For them, this is a live discussion. They don't want to get involved in something that they understand is deeply divisive on campus. And the thing that, as we were sort of digesting the law school dean's messaging and the university president's messaging, the thing that really jumped out to me is that there is room for discussion about the history of Israel in regards to the region, the geopolitics of the place. Rational people can disagree on whether 67 was a good decision, where the borders should sit, how we move forward. But the thing that was really lacking for me was a baseline. And I say that because I've had discussions with people who disagree with me on this. And I've found that without agreeing that what happened on October 7th is a crime beyond words, a tragedy in human history, there's no words to describe what happened. Without agreeing that there's no justification for that and there's no way to see that in a broader context, without first acknowledging how it feels and what it looks like and who perpetrated it and what their reasoning was, there's no discussion to be had. And I think the failure of the universities is not in failing to come out strongly enough in support of Jews specifically or in support of Israel specifically, but in failing to make it clear that that is the only acceptable baseline for dialogue. And it is. That's the only acceptable baseline for dialogue.
Right.
You have to recognize that what happened on October 7th is the worst tragedy in the history of this country, and you have to give it the space to sink in emotionally for the people who are living it currently. That's the only way to move forward.
And you're saying that by that standard, neither the law school leadership nor the university leadership rose to the moment. To the contrary.
Not even close.
Not even close.
They let the campus discussion run its course, and I think in doing so, they've fanned the flames of disagreement.
Is it fair to say to both of you that on certain other so-called moral issues, the university did not hesitate? I'm guessing, you'll tell me, on the Russian invasion of Ukraine, on Roe v. Wade, on George Floyd in Minneapolis, on the attack on the LGBTQ club in Orlando, the Pulse Club. Did the university take a moral stand? Did it duck, or did it look for the 50-yard line?
I don't recall specific statements, but I don't question that the university stood up in those moments. I believe even last year when there was a lot of controversy with Yeshiva University and their LGBTQ club, I believe Columbia Law put out a statement and the dean sent out a message.
Even though
if I recall correctly,
for a different university.
For a different university. Mm-hmm. I don't think the university has ever shied from standing up for things that they think are right. And that begs to ask the question, do you not think it's right to stand up for Israel and for the Jews in this situation where hundreds of lives were murdered, innocent civilians? And I think that's where it's reasonable to say that there's some sense of anti-Semitism going on here. not even just subconsciously, but overtly, to not come out right away and say what happened here is unquestionably horrific. No matter, nothing can justify it. There's nothing that you could say that Hamas could do what they did. The fact that they couldn't do that, the fact that student groups couldn't do that, I think is the telling sign.
Does that leave you with a sense of vulnerability, isolation, abandonment, anger, resentment, or all the above? Or
So absolutely all of the above. I think for people like me who grew up sort of on the secular side of the Jewish spectrum, for me it's the absolute secular side of the Jewish spectrum, Israeli students, people who have been in the United States for a long time, none of this is unexpected. It's a failure because this is an unprecedented moment and sort of a run-of-the-mill response isn't appropriate. But it wasn't unexpected. The thing that's really come into focus for
why
me,
do you say it wasn't unexpected? I don't want people to assume they know what you're thinking. Why?
So I've been thinking about this, and I'll put this in a way that has come to make sense to me. And I think this is a real trend in academia and in sort of the progressive left. There's an understanding, and this is a real sort of development in the academic literature, that the best way to understand conflict is to look at power. And this has been translated, I think, especially to university students, as a heuristic that says whosoever is the weaker group is the righteous group. Mm-hmm. And I think that's been compounded with an inability on the part of Americans generally, and university students especially, to distinguish between Israel and Jews, between Jews and a white population on the whole, and between their sort of assumptions and stereotypes about Jews and the reality of Jewish life. So I think university students, and I hope this is just in the United States, but I think it's global, have a deep-seated and sort of emotional understanding that Israelis are powerful and therefore monstrous. Jews support monstrous players, are also, they perceive to be powerful, and are therefore also monstrous. And it takes a lot of effort and a lot of empathy on the part of individuals to get out of this rubric.
So even though Israel is a nation of 9.5 million, surrounded by a country like Iran, with a much faster population that publicly declares its aim of eradicating Israel, that it supports Hamas, Hezbollah, it's present in Syria, it's dominating Iraq, it's present in Yemen, Israel is still seen as the dominant, powerful, and therefore sinful player.
100%.
Right. Eli, you have a vantage point from the law school about the larger campus and what's going on. And I think you mentioned to me before the show began that there were some groups that were gathering together and were seeking to exclude some people from their participation. Can you tell us about that, as we have just a few minutes left, but it's important that gets put on the table.
Yeah, there is an undergraduate student organization that was putting on a movie night, and they wrote Zionists not allowed to come. And someone...
This was on the invitation.
This was on the
email,
the post.
On the email announcing it.
It wasn't on the actual flyer, but it was on the post that they put
Zionists are not
allowed
to come.
Yeah, and my understanding from what I've heard, the leader of the organization, after someone had reached out to her to understand why she's saying that, she sent this whole vitriolic message saying that Israel does not allow colored Jews, and Israel is just an oppressor, and literally verbatim F Israel. And I think it's not really just even in the undergrad, even in the law school, there are many students that are no longer want to be a part of certain organizations, certain clubs, that again didn't make any sense to sign on. For example, the Student Representation Project or the Pro Advocacy Project. There are many 1Ls, Jews, Israelis, whoever it may be, that wanted to
1Ls are first-year law students.
Sorry,
right?
first-year law students.
For those of us who never went to law school, we're not all perfect.
And they're just afraid to be a part because they know they're not accepted, because they know that there are people who run those organizations that literally just because they're Jewish, that means they're bad, and they don't want to be associated with that.
And just before we move on from this, sorry to jump in,
But I begin to wrap up.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to highlight two things. One, that this email that the leader of this group sent, the last sentence of the first paragraph said, and I quote, "The Holocaust was not that special." Which is to say, you've milked this exaggerated tragedy in your history, you Jews, and we don't care about it. That was my interpretation. The other thing that I wanted to highlight is that this is not just a feeling that we have. Eli himself was targeted for being Jewish.
Yeah, I'll just say quickly, that's how bad it's gotten. I was sitting in the main law school building, in the main hallway where everyone walks through, in the middle of the afternoon, 2:30 in the afternoon, on my laptop. An individual walks by, stops, looks at me for about a few seconds, and then I hear him say out loud, "F the Jews."
And he was a student?
And he just walks away. He was a Columbia student. I reached out to the public safety office. I reported it right away. He's a Columbia student, not a Columbia Law School. But that's how bad it is, where someone could walk into the building. They don't have any purpose in being there, but their sole objective is just to say something like that out loud in the middle of the afternoon to Jews.
We have 30 seconds left for each of you. Unfortunately, the time has gone really quickly. A last message. What do you want the university president, what do you want the trustees, what do you want the alumni, what do you want donors to know right now? How can they help? How should they help?
They have
Eli?
to stand up, raise their voice. That if any other minority would ever be oppressed in any way whatsoever, even in the smallest fashion, no one would stop from shouting from the rooftops. How could that happen? And here, for some reason, everyone's quiet.
Yorai?
Yeah, for me, it's the exact same thing, and it's something that came up when you visited Columbia Law School, is that what we're seeing is not the problem in itself. This is a symptom of a broader trend towards anti-Semitism in the globe and anti-Israel sentiment in the world. And if we don't start addressing the root cause and understanding where it's coming from, this will never go away. So keep fighting, keep explaining, and we'll make it through.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think you've just heard two remarkable students, two courageous students, two students on the front line at one of America's great universities. You've heard the kinds of challenges they face, both as Jews and as friends of Israel. They need support, they need help, they need understanding. And I hope that the JBS viewing audience will respond to their need. This is David Harris, Defending Israel. Thank you for joining us.